Everything in Alaska eventually melts, except for one cabin. No matter the season, no matter the temperature, it stays frozen. Locals avoid it. Pilots won't fly over it. And the last 3 hikers who went looking for it never came back the same. It started with a whisper of legend buried in an old ranger's log, an isolated structure deep in the Talkeetna wilderness, untouched by time, snow, or sun. Described as preserved like something holding its breath, the logbook notes claimed that the cabin had been discovered back in the 1950s by 2 bush pilots looking for a downed aircraft. What they found instead was a wooden structure so cold their instruments began malfunctioning within 100 yards. One of the pilots described the air as feeling reverse breathable, like something was pulling oxygen into the walls. They only stayed 5 minutes, but when they returned to their plane, their clocks had jumped ahead 7 hours. The coordinates were quietly removed from maps. But like most secrets in Alaska, the silence only made it louder. Fast forward to 2011. A survival YouTuber named Cam Miller posted a cryptic teaser about a non-melting place he was planning to explore off-grid. His last upload was titled Night Before the Cold House. It featured him laughing in front of campfire, holding an old topographic map. He never posted again. 3 weeks later, his gear was found neatly arranged next to a partially dug snow pit. Yet there were no signs of him, no tracks, and no weather disturbances in the area. Just a single object left in the snow. A compass that spun like a fan blade. Those who've gotten close to the cabin say it doesn't make sense. Not just in a physical way, but in a dimensional one. According to an Alaskan SAR volunteer who passed within 300 yards of it, the trees begin to bow inward as if pulled by an invisible gravity. You feel watched, but not from the woods, from underneath. He reported that when you get close, your thoughts echo back to you, but they return slightly changed. He swears he heard his own voice whisper from the tree line. He called it the stillness. He said it didn't move because it wasn't meant to, like a placeholder for something that had been forgotten by time. Inside the cabin, there was no dust, no smell, just one item on a table. A black and white photo of himself as a child, standing in front of the same cabin. One detail chilled him. He'd never been to Alaska before that trip. What could make a cabin immune to time, weather, even memory? Some theorize it's a natural geological anomaly. Permafrost interacting with unknown mineral patterns. But others say it's not Alaskan at all. That it only uses Alaska because it's remote enough to stay hidden. That the cabin isn't even a building, but a container for something that must remain still or awaken. Psychologically, many who have researched the phenomenon report intrusive thoughts afterward. Dreams of doorways without walls. The sound of knocking on frozen wood, even when no one else is home. One researcher, after spending months analyzing the strange radio frequencies near the area, began referring to his own apartment as Base Camp 2. He lived in Oregon. He vanished in 2020. The only thing left behind? A hand-drawn map of Alaska with one spot marked in red ink. Next to it, the words, "It never thawed. It never will." The most disturbing part? It's not the cabin itself. It's how people find it. They aren't shown. They're called. There are reports of people dreaming of cold, empty rooms for weeks before stumbling across a map or coordinates. Hikers losing their way only to realize they've wandered directly into the so-called Dead Valley. One woman in Fairbanks said her daughter kept drawing pictures of a square house with no lights, even though they'd never gone camping. Each drawing got darker. The last one had no cabin at all, just snow, and 2 black eyes watching from underneath. The legend of the cabin continues to grow in forums, deep Reddit threads, and old logs passed among rangers and pilots like cursed artifacts. What remains chilling is this. Even in July, when the tundra blooms and the rivers run full, satellite images show that one single point remains cold. Colder than the surrounding land. Colder than the science allows. And every year, the circle of frost expands just a little more. So if you ever find yourself hiking deep in Alaska, and the air suddenly turns dry, and your watch skips a few minutes, and your compass begins to dance, turn around, because you might be near the cabin that never melted. Some Alaskan towns vanish without warning, not from storms or time, but because something older and colder moves through them. Places where roads remain, but the stories don't. And if you ever take a wrong turn and end up in one of these places, don't stop. Don't even slow down. I was driving from Fairbanks to Anchorage in late February. Not my first winter trip through Alaska, but certainly my last. A snowstorm had closed the main highway just south of Cantwell. I didn't have time to wait out. I was supposed to be in Anchorage by morning, and my GPS suggested a detour, a back route through a place called Orville Creek. The name didn't ring any bells, and that's the thing. It didn't exist on any paper map, just the GPS, which insisted it was a usable road. At first, the detour seemed harmless. The road was narrow but well-maintained, cutting through dense forest that looked older than the surrounding landscape. Every tree looked like it had stood there for centuries, their branches heavy with untouched snow. There were no tire tracks ahead of me, and I passed no other cars. But I chalked that up to the storm warnings. Who else would be out here? Then I saw the sign, "Welcome to Orville Creek, EST 1913. It looked recently painted, weirdly pristine against the weathered trees. But here's the thing. I couldn't find any records of an Orville Creek online before or after, not even on Alaskan ghost town registries. The road dipped into a shallow valley, and that's when I saw the town. Buildings lined both sides of the snow-blanketed street. Wooden storefronts, a silent gas station with glass still intact, a post office whose doors were shut tight. No lights, no footprints, but the town looked paused, not abandoned, not destroyed, just left, like someone hit a mute button on time itself. And yet, the snow wasn't quite right. It was perfectly even, no sign of melting or settling. It lay over every roof like a white cloth over a forgotten body. There were no icicles, no wind drift, just untouched snow that seemed to glow faintly under the overcast sky. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean it glowed. I slowed down without realizing it, my eyes drawn to a figure ahead. It stood at the edge of the street, about 30 feet away, facing one of the shops. It wasn't moving. I thought it might be a mannequin, maybe a decoration left over from better days. But as I got closer, I saw the fog of breath. Slow, steady. It was human. I stopped the car, rolled the window down a crack. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. Not even a turn of the head. That's when the lights turned on. Every building in the town lit up at once. Not with the flicker of a generator, but smoothly, like a light cue in a stage play. Warm yellow glows in every window. Neon buzzes above the diner. Soft lamplight inside a home across the street. The figure finally moved, turning not toward me, but away. It walked, slow and deliberate, through the front doors of the general store. The bell above the door jingled once, then silence again. And I don't know why I followed. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. But something about that moment, it was like sleepwalking. I got out of the car, my boots crunching on the unnaturally hard snow, and stepped onto the wooden sidewalk of the general store. Inside was warmer than it should have been. There was no dust, no decay. Shelves were stocked. Newspapers were neatly folded by the register. One of them had a date, March 5th, 1952. That's not a detail I remember. It's a detail I can't forget. I touched the counter and felt warmth. Not metaphorical comfort, actual warmth. Like the store had been open minutes before. Then I heard it. A clock ticking. Steady, rhythmic, but too loud for the space. It didn't echo. It didn't come from the walls. It came from behind me. I turned, and there was no one there. But the front doors were gone. Gone. Not closed. Not replaced. Just absent. Like the wall had never been designed with an entrance. I looked at the window. It now showed nothing but blackness. Not night. Not fog. Pure black, like the glass was a screen turned off. The ticking grew louder, faster. My pulse followed it. Then something whispered just behind my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. It sounded like syllables being chewed. I backed up, knocking over a display of canned goods. They didn't fall right. They moved too slowly, like they were sinking through water. The entire store felt suddenly submerged. Then, everything stopped. The lights cut out. The ticking halted. The whisper vanished. I blinked and the front door was back. But the snow outside was different. It had footprints now. Dozens of them, all leading away from the town. None leading in. I sprinted to my car, heart pounding. The engine started on the first try, even though it had been off for what felt like hours. I drove, not even checking the GPS. The road behind me disappeared faster than I could glance back. Trees closed in like curtains. I drove for maybe 15 minutes before rejoining the highway. But here's where it gets worse. When I stopped at a gas station just north of Anchorage, I tried to explain to the clerk what I'd seen. He gave me a blank look when I mentioned Orville Creek. Said he'd lived in Alaska his whole life. Never heard of it. I pulled out my phone, opened the GPS app to check the route, and that's when I saw it. The route I'd taken didn't show up. It was gone. No log. No save route. Nothing in the history. Only one line of text at the bottom of the screen. Exit successful. Detour complete. That night, I dreamed of the town. I saw the same figure, now facing me. Its face was pale and frozen, eyes sunk deep into sockets that held no light. And when it opened its mouth, I heard my own voice come out, not in panic, but calmly repeating the words I'd said at the gas station. Like a loop, like something had recorded me from inside the town. I've searched for Orville Creek since, asked locals, dug through state archives. Nothing. It's not a ghost town because it's not a town at all. It's a reroute, a fold in the map for people who think they know where they're going. But if you ever see it, don't stop. Don't even slow down, because you don't take the shortcut. The shortcut takes you. The ice in Alaska is alive. Sometimes when everything is still, no wind, no wildlife, not even your own breath, you can hear it. A sound that shouldn't exist beneath a frozen lake. A slow, rhythmic exhale, like something ancient is sleeping under your boots and dreaming. But dreams eventually end, and sometimes the thing dreaming wakes up. The story comes from a man named Elliot, a field technician for a remote environmental research station near the Kobuk River Valley. In January of 2021, he was stationed alone for a 5-day survey trip to monitor seismic activity and permafrost melt. Temperatures drop below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit at night. The kind of cold that doesn't just bite your skin, but whispers to your bones. On his third night, something changed. Elliot had been documenting minor tremors, normal for the area. But that night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., his seismic sensor picked up a pulse. Not a tremor, a pulse. A single, deep vibration that echoed upward from far below the glacial shelf. He described it later as organic, not sharp, not jagged like tectonic movement, more like a breath, as if the earth had exhaled once, long and slow. At first, he dismissed it as ice shifting, until he realized the ice wasn't cracking. It was bowing. The glacial shelf he camped on had a frozen lake beneath it, thick, ancient ice, solid for thousands of years. But that night, the ice formed a dome. Subtle, slow, but visible, as if something beneath was pushing up. He went outside to check, flashlight in hand, eyes barely adjusting to the moonlit blue. The wind was dead, the air completely still. And then he heard it, a long, low hiss, but not from the wind, not mechanical, not air escaping from gear. It was coming from under the ice, a sound like breathing. He backed up. His brain instantly defaulted to logic. Methane pockets? Pressure shifts, thermal expansion, but methane doesn't pace, because that's what the sound started doing. It moved, first from the center of the lake, then closer, then under his boots, then back again, like a lung shifting side to side in a frozen chest. Elliot stayed up the rest of the night, armed with his radio and a bear rifle. But nothing else happened, not until morning. That's when the real anomaly appeared, not in the ice, but in the air. His drone, launched at sunrise, captured something chilling. The footage shows Elliot standing by the shore of the lake, inspecting the warped ice. But from above, you can see it clearly. A shape beneath the surface. Not a crack, not a shadow. A silhouette, oval, elongated, roughly 20 feet across. And it was moving, slowly, counterclockwise, beneath the frozen lake. As if pacing, orbiting him. What's more disturbing, there were no bubbles. No heat fissures, no signs of melting, which means whatever was moving wasn't melting the ice. It was within the ice. By now, Elliot was terrified. He tried to contact base camp, but the radio only buzzed back static. He considered leaving, but a storm had locked in from the north. No flights in or out. No vehículos. Just snow, ice, and the thing beneath it. He stayed in his cabin that second night, barely sleeping, clutching his emergency flare and counting the seconds between that haunting, unnatural breath. 6 seconds apart, every single time, like clockwork. On the 5th night, something changed again. The breath stopped. Elliot sat upright at 2:17 a.m., waiting for the sound. But it never came. No vibración, no hissing, nothing. The silence was worse. Until the ice cracked. Not a slow fissure. A sharp, deliberate one. From his window, he saw it. A perfect vertical line down the center of the lake. Then another, perpendicular, like a cross being carved from below. And in the center, a hole began to open. Round, controlled, and breathing resumed. But this time it wasn't rhythmic. It was panicked. The drone captured it all at dawn. A perfect circle, now 5 feet wide, carved in the ice. The edges were not broken. They were melted, precision cut, and the drone's thermal camera, it picked up heat signatures from below the ice. Several of them, moving, not in a school like fish, in formation, for distinct figures, long, slender, and synchronized. They weren't swimming. They were patrolling. And just before the footage cuts, one of them looked up. There were no eyes, just a flat, mask-like face, pale white against the blue ice. What were they? That's where the analysis begins, and things get stranger. You see, this isn't the first time something like this has been reported in that region. In 1974, a group of Inupiat hunters reported finding a breathing hole in the exact same location. Perfectly round, with claw marks frozen around the rim. The village elders referred to it in whispers as unugpak, loosely translated as the sleepers beneath. In their legends, there were spirits that lived under the land, not the sky, sleeping things that fed on silence, that listened, and the only way to keep them sleeping was not to speak their name. Elliot never knew that name, but he wrote it down anyway. He found it carved inside a rock shelf half a mile from the lake. Symbols, ancient, repeating. It matched the word from the legend. Unugpak. And then his journal ended. Elliot was found 5 days later when weather allowed a flight. The cabin was intact, the gear untouched. But the lake? The lake was gone. Not drained, not flooded, frozen smooth. The hole had vanished, like it had never been there. Even the cracks were gone, and the ice, according to thermal scans, was now twice as thick, almost as if something had returned below it. Breathing again. And one last thing. The final page of Elliot's journal wasn't handwritten. It was etched, burned into the paper, with letters so deep they scarred the page. Just 3 words. Do not listen. But the tape recorder left in his cabin was still playing, looping the same 6 seconds of static over and over again, until in the last second, there's a breath, and then a voice, whispered, barely audible, a voice that said, "We hear you." In 2019, a solo hiker named Drew took a 4-day trip up a stretch of the Denali Trail rarely walked during the early thaw. The snow was beginning to rot, thick, slushy, unpredictable, but he was chasing silence. He needed space, he said, time to reset. But what he found wasn't peace. It was something else, something that already knew his name. He started hiking just after dawn on a Tuesday, the sky a cold, bone-pale blue. Denali's upper elevations still looked locked in winter, but the trailhead at the base was already blooming with meltwater and ghostly quiet. Drew wasn't new to solitude. He'd done multi-day hikes across Colorado and Utah. He'd even backpacked the Chilkoot Trail once. But Denali was different. Bigger, quieter, emptier. He told his friends he chose that trail because it was beautiful, but he later admitted something about it fell off, as if the silence was too complete. Even the birdsong faded quicker than it should have. The first day was uneventful, but just before sundown, he noticed something strange. He was walking alongside a ridge when he saw footprints crossing the path ahead of him. Not animal prints. Human. Barefoot. And not melted, fresh. The odd part? The snow where the prints began had no trail leading up to it. They just started, out of nowhere, as if someone had been dropped from the sky. He looked around. Nothing. Not even a squirrel in the trees. But that was just the beginning. That night, as he set up camp near a frozen stream, he heard the first whisper. He described it as faint, like someone sighing into the back of his neck. But when he turned around, the woods were empty. He laughed it off. Long hikes can make you paranoid. Sound plays tricks in the cold. But then it happened again. This time it was clearer. Drew, just his name, carried like smoke through the dark trees. He didn't sleep much that night. By morning, there were new prints near his tent. Same barefoot pattern, same strange start. No approach. Just a sudden appearance a few feet from where he'd been sleeping. He scanned the tree line. No movement. No animal signs. Nothing that could explain it. Drew debated turning back, but he'd trained for this trip for months. He told himself it was a squatter. Maybe some other hiker who didn't want to be found. Still, he packed quickly and pressed forward. On the second day, the trail narrowed and rose into thinner air. Denali's vast white peaks loomed like sleeping giants on the horizon. The wind was louder now, but underneath it, Drew kept hearing something else. Not constantly, but in moments, right as the wind dropped. Just enough silence for something else to slip in. Come back. The voice always used his name. Turn around. Sometimes it was distant, like a voice carried from a cliff face. Other times it was disturbingly close. Once, it came from behind a snowbank, no more than 10 feet away. But when he checked, there were no tracks. No sign of anyone. He stopped making recordings after that. His phone began glitching. Recordings would warp, distort, or refuse to play back entirely. But one clip did survive. In it, the forest is silent. Then, faintly, a voice rasps. "You left me here." That's when Drew started remembering something he hadn't thought about in years. A childhood trip to Alaska. A different trail. His brother had been there. His twin. They were 6, playing near a river while their father fished. For just a moment, Drew had wandered off, following something he thought was a fox. When he came back, his brother was gone. The search lasted 3 days, but the body was never found. No clothes, no tracks, no sign he'd even left the spot. Authorities eventually called it an animal attack, but Drew always remembered the silence that followed his brother's name. He never returned to Alaska until now. The second night, Drew didn't sleep at all. Every time he shut his eyes, he heard footsteps crunching the frost just outside the tent. He'd shine his flashlight, and nothing. But the voice was getting bolder. "Why did you leave me?" On the third morning, he found something half buried in the snow. A photo, water damaged, old, faded, but it was unmistakable. It was him and his brother, sitting side by side in matching red coats. That photo had never left his parents' house. It shouldn't have been there. He checked his pack. Everything intact. Nothing missing. So how? He kept moving, barely eating, barely drinking. The air grew colder, though forecasts hadn't predicted it. The landscape grew unfamiliar. He said it felt like the trail was shifting. The trees looked the same. The landmarks disappeared. Even the map began to feel wrong, like he was walking through a dream that remembered him more than he remembered it. Then came the third night. No wind, no birds, just a thick, unnatural stillness. Then Drew, louder than ever. He sat up and saw something standing between trees. Pale, barefoot, watching. It looked like him. Same face, same stance, same backpack. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too focused. And then it smiled. Drew didn't run. He said he couldn't. His legs felt frozen. All he could do was listen. The thing spoke. "I waited. I called. But you never came back." And then it stepped backward into the woods, leaving no prints. The next morning, Drew started back down the trail, never once looking behind him. When he reached the ranger station, he was sunburned, dehydrated, and shaking. They called for medical assistance, but he refused to explain what happened. He just kept muttering, "It knew my name." Later, a search crew returned to the area. No signs of any other hikers. No footprints besides Drew's. But they did find one strange thing. A set of child-sized boots. Old, weathered, half buried in the snow. Tucked inside one of them was a single red mitten, the kind you put on a 6-year-old. Alaska has more ghost towns than living ones. But not every ghost town stays empty, and not every footprint leads out. In 2017, a geologist named Reed was part of a small survey team sent to study shoreline erosion off the southern Alaskan coast, just north of Kodiak Island. The area, largely uninhabited, had a series of derelict fishing villages, once bustling in the 1950s and 60s, but now mostly reclaimed by moss, salt, and time. The crew had planned a 2-day stop at a place called Shoal Point, a former halibut village that hadn't been charted in nearly 30 years. There were no roads to get there, only air or boat access, and according to every database, it had long been abandoned. No locales, no squates, just broken docks, rusted winches, and collapsed cabins. But that's not what they found. The first sign something was off came before they even docked. A set of footprints, deep, human, and recent, was visible in the frost along the shoreline, heading from the tree line straight into the heart of the village. And, just as strangely, there were no prints leading back out. Now keep in mind, this was early spring. Temperatures at night were well below freezing. The frost was undisturbed everywhere else. No animals, no ateubetres, just those solitary prints, like someone had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Reed thought maybe it was another survey team, but the trail didn't make sense. It led to a collapsed boathouse, one that had half caved in on itself. No smoke, no gear, no sign of shelter. Just silence. Shoal Point wasn't large. Maybe 8 buildings. A church, a few cabins, a longhouse. Most were half swallowed by sea grass and snowdrift. The crew, uneasy but on a tight timeline, split up to take readings and sample erosion patterns. That's when things got strange. Reed said the first real wrong moment happened inside what used to be a general store. It was mostly empty, but on the counter was a glass fishing float. Not strange in itself, except it was clean, crystal clean. No dust, no sand, just sitting there like someone had polished it that morning. Next to it was a strip of birch bark with a single word carved into it. Stay. Reed didn't know what to make of it. He called it in, but the others had their own reports. One crew member, Kayla, found a working lantern. Not battery-powered. Oil. Still warm to the touch. Another guy, Mark, heard movement inside the church. Footsteps shuffling behind the altar. When he pushed the door open, there was nothing but a draft. No animals. No trappings. No sign of life. And then the radios went dead. Just static. All within an hour of arriving. The team decided to pack up early and leave before nightfall. But that's when they noticed the tracks had changed. Now, there were 2 sets. One set still led in from the forest. But now a second pair of prints, barefoot, trailed behind them. Same size. No shoes. No socks. Just raw impressions in the frost, following the original tracks, step for step, but never overtaking them. Like someone, or something, had been stalking the first. They followed the prints to the collapsed boathouse, and inside, buried beneath a half-rotten tarp, was a bedroll. Fresh, dry, and beside it a notebook. Here's where things get murky. Reed later shared parts of what was written inside. The handwriting was shaky, erratic, page after page of what looked like survival notes, weather updates, calorie counts, tide tables. Then, halfway through, the tone shifted. Here's a translated excerpt from one of the final entries. Something walks at night. It doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. It waits until I speak, then repeats what I say back. Only slightly off, like it's trying to learn how I sound. Another. I thought it was a bear, but bears don't knock on doors. And alas, I left tracks coming in, but mine aren't the only ones anymore. I keep checking. The prints are identical. Same stride, same angle. Only difference is mine stop at the boathouse. The others circle, over and over. They want me to know I'm not alone. The notebook ended with a smeared page, as if something had been spilled on it. Water? Blood? Ink? No one could say for sure. Needless to say, they left immediately. But here's the part that gives me chills. When the team got back to Anchorage, Reed asked about Shoal Point's history. He found a man, old, nearly blind, who'd lived near there in the 60s. Said his father helped build the village before it failed. He mentioned a legend, something the Aleut locals warned them about. A spirit or creature, not quite a ghost, not quite a man. Something old. They called it Nalusa Chito, the shadow that walks behind. According to the stories, it mimics the living, not by appearance but by behavior, voice, movement, even memories. It follows, it learns, and once it knows enough, it replaces. Now here's the real kicker. Reed never went back to the field after that. He quit geology entirely. But one of his colleagues, Mark, the one who heard footsteps in the church, later returned to Shoal Point on his own. Just a personal trip. He never reported in. Never came back. A week later, his wife got a voicemail from his satellite phone. No words, just breathing. And in the last few seconds, a faint echo of her own voice, whispering her name, but she never said a word. And the call was traced back to Anchorage. Not Shoal Point, not the wilderness, a block from her own home. Alaska are blamed on nature. Blizzards, wildlife, the land swallowing you whole. But if you talk to the truckers who drive the Dalton Highway at night, they'll tell you something different. Something waits at mile marker 326, and it doesn't want you to leave. Colton was a long-haul driver, tough, no nonsense, and unshakable, or so he thought. He'd been on the road for nearly 2 decades and said that Dalton was one of the loneliest highways in North America. Just ice, silence, and sometimes shapes in the fog you pretended not to see. His run that night was routine, Barrow to Fairbanks with a half-load of fuel. He wasn't expecting delays. Weather was clear, skies dark but calm, and no auroras to distract the eye. But around 11:40 p.m., his CB radio popped with static. Just a brief hiss like a whisper breathing in. Then silence. At 11:57 p.m., his dashboard lights flickered once. He tapped the panel. No issues. But when he glanced up, a wooden sign whipped past in his headlights. Mile 326. That's when his engine sputtered. It didn't stop, just coughed, struggled like it was freezing up from the inside. Colton eased off the gas, coasting to a crawl. He was miles from the nearest outpost, deep in the dark belly of Alaska. But something else caught his attention. Something that shouldn't have been there. A figure standing on the side of the road. Not waving, not hitchhiking, just standing. At first, he assumed it was a moose or a shadow. But no, this was human. Pale, still, and dressed in something too thin for this kind of weather. Looked like a hospital gown or something close to it. Colton slowed more. The figure didn't move. And when his headlights hit it directly, he saw no breath. No fog in the air around its mouth. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it had been broken, but not fatally. And yet it was smiling. Colton knew better than to stop. He gritted his teeth, rolled his window up tight, and pressed the pedal down hard. But even at 45 miles per hour, he swore he saw the figure move. Not walk, glide. It turned to face him as he passed, head following the truck, smile still wide. He checked the rear view. No one there. But 10 minutes later, the dashboard glitched again. Only this time, every gauge dropped to 0. No speed, no oil pressure, nothing. A full systems blackout. The engine didn't cut, but the lights dimmed. And then, the CB crackled again. A voice. Faint, distant. It said, "Why did you leave me there?" Colton slammed the brakes. Hard. He wasn't wearing a headset. The CB wasn't on any channel. And he sure as hell wasn't expecting that. Heart pounding, he looked around. Just snow. Just darkness. But when he turned back toward the road ahead, there it was. The figure, standing directly in the middle of the highway. This time, its arms were stretched out. Not in welcome, not in fear, but like it wanted to be hit. Colton swerved violently, his truck fishtailing on the icy road, rear tires sliding sideways. He managed to avoid it barely. The trailer groaned, and for a moment, he thought the whole rig would tip, but it righted itself, slamming down hard on the frosted pavement. He didn't stop. He didn't look back, but the CB whispered again. "You're almost there." By 12:32 a.m., he reached an old emergency pull-off. Colton parked, shaking, lungs burning from the stress. He didn't know why, but he had to check the trailer. He climbed down, boots crunching on hard snow, and that's when he saw them. Footprints. Not tire tracks. Not animal prints. Bare human feet, leading from a road to the rear of his trailer, and stopping there, but not leaving. With a deep breath, he swung the trailer doors open. Nothing inside, just barrels and crates. No one, no thing, no trace, except a single line scratched into the frost-covered inner wall, thin and jagged, like from a broken nail. It read, "You made it farther this time." Colton didn't sleep that night. He kept the truck running, heater on full, and watched the snow pile higher on his windshield. When dawn broke and the first hint of sun touched the horizon, he drove. Didn't stop until Fairbanks. He told no one what happened. Not until weeks later, after his third return trip past mile 326. Each time the same things. The engine glitches, the figure, the voice on the radio. But on that third trip, something changed. The figure was closer. Not on the roadside, not in the middle of the road, but sitting on the hood of the truck, grinning. That was the last run Colton ever made. He left the job, moved south, never drove again. But here's where it gets strange. The company he worked for, they lost 3 other drivers in the same area. No crashes, no bodies, just abandoned rigs near mile marker 326. CB logs recovered from those trucks captured similar patterns. Static, glitches, and always the same voice. You're almost there. There's a theory, one that doesn't get shared outside the Alaska trucking community. That mile marker 326 isn't just a location. It's a loop, a snare, a place where time rewinds just slightly. Enough to feel familiar. Enough to make you wonder if you've been here before. Some say it's an echo of someone who died out there. A patient from a long-defunct asylum north of Fairbanks, whose body was never found. Others believe it's something older, prehistoric, a presence that mimics the human form to lure wanderers away from the road. But the most disturbing idea is that you don't pass by mile 326. You get stuck in it. And if it likes you, if it chooses you, then no matter how far you drive, no matter what route you take, eventually it catches up. The lodge wasn't on any brochure, no website, no social media. My cousin Derek swore by it though, said it was peaceful, off-grid, surrounded by nothing but pine, snow, and silence. He called it true escape, like the kind people crave when the world gets too loud. I've been burned out, city life, emails, screens that never slept. So I booked the place for 5 days in January. And that's when things started to slip. The flow plane that dropped me off was the only way in or out during winter. The pilot, a gray-haired guy with frostbitten hands, looked at me strangely when I said the lodge's name. He mumbled something like, "You sure that place is still standing?" before taking off fast, as if he didn't want to answer questions. The building itself was small but solid. Timber beams, a frozen lake out front, no electricity, but a fireplace and stacks of canned food in the cellar. Honestly, it was beautiful. Too quiet, maybe, but peaceful. For the first day, I felt calm for the first time in months. I read. I napped. I chopped wood until my arms ached. That night, I journaled by lantern light in my leather-bound notebook. Just random thoughts, dreams, things I wanted to do when I got back. But the next morning, my journal wasn't in my backpack. It was already on the wooden desk in the corner of the cabin. I don't remember placing it there. The weird part, it was already open, to a page I hadn't written yet. The entry read, Day 3. The noises last night were louder. I think something's under the floorboards. I blinked, closed the book, figured I must have written it late and forgotten. Nothing to worry about. But something didn't sit right with me. It was the handwriting. It looked like mine, but it wasn't quite. The letters were a little too narrow. The capital T had a curve I never use. Later that night, as I was laying in bed with the fire dying low, I heard something shift in the walls. Not mice. Bigger. A dragging sound. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked under the floorboards. Just insulation, old dust, and some bits of fur. But the journal was open again, new page. Another entry I hadn't written. Day 4, I saw myself standing outside the window. I didn't move until he smiled. I laughed nervously. The kind of laugh people make when they don't know if they're dreaming or breaking. I flipped back through the pages. The old entries were mine, but everything from the moment I arrived here had been altered, subtle tweaks in wording. Thoughts I never remembered having. Ideas I would have written, maybe, but hadn't. I considered burning the journal. But curiosity is a parasite. Once it's inside, it's already feeding. That night, I locked the journal in a cabinet. Took a walk in the snow just to clear my head. The stars were brutal in their brightness. No wind, no sound. I stood by the edge of the lake. That's when I noticed footprints, mine leading up to the water. And another set, deeper, wider. They stopped 5 feet behind me. I turned, heart thudding. Nothing, no one, but I swear I heard breathing. I ran back to the cabin. The lock on the cabinet was snapped. Not picked, snapped. The journal was open again, on the bed. The next entry chilled my blood. Day 5. He knows I've seen it now. The version of me that stayed behind the first time. What did that mean? The first time? I called the pilot on the emergency radio, but the signal was fried, only static. I tried packing my things to hike out, but the GPS wouldn't connect. Even my compass spun like the needle didn't know which way north was. Every time I turned around, I thought I saw movement. In mirrors, in the windows. My reflection delayed. Off. Smiling when I wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with a knife and the journal. I watched the fireplace slowly die. The journal flipped pages on its own, as if the air was moving, though the windows were shut. The final page wasn't a diary entry, just a phrase. You're already the copy, the real you never left. I dropped the book, backed away, and then I heard the footsteps upstairs. Heavy, slow, measured, like someone was pacing directly above me. But the lodge didn't have a second floor. I ran out into the snow, breath fogging like steam. The stars above were gone. Black sky, the kind of black that eats light. I turned to look at the cabin and saw myself in the window, smiling, waving. I woke up to the sound of the pilot's plane circling. I was lying in the snow, journal clutched to my chest, my fingers frostbitten. He said I'd missed our pickup by 2 days, that he'd come back only out of guilt. I didn't argue. When I got home, things weren't right. My friend said I'd been acting strange before the trip. Quit my job. Cut off everyone. But I didn't remember that. My apartment was filled with drawings of that lodge. Sketches. Diagrams. One page, taped to the mirror read, "If you're reading this, it already took your place." And in my backpack was the journal. Still full. But now all the entries were in my handwriting. Exactly as I'd write them. Except I never wrote a single word after the first night. And I don't remember drawing those maps, or smiling that way in the mirror. The aurora borealis is just light, charged particles from the sun. But what if it's not? What if it's something watching us? And what if it opens something when no one else is around? We weren't thrill seekers, just 2 guys trying to unplug. Ryan and I worked IT at the same company in Anchorage. High stress, low reward. So when he suggested an off-grid trip to Nome in mid-January, I didn't hesitate. No emails, no clients, just snow, silence, and a sky so wide it swallows your thoughts. The locals had warned us, don't stray past Heller Highway after dark. They were polite but firm, something about strange pulls when the auroras got strong. We thought it was superstition. One bartender even said, don't look too long at the lights. They looked back. We laughed. The cabin we rented was 2 hours out. No neighbors, no signal. Just us firewood and a sky full of green silk. That first night we saw them, the lights. Not just streaks across the sky like we'd seen in town before. These were massive, moving. They pulsed like they were breathing. It didn't feel like we were looking at them, more like we were inside them. I swear, at one point, the snow turned blue under the glow. We stayed up until 2:30 a.m., sipping whiskey, watching the ribbons twist. That's when the sound started. It wasn't wind. It was rhythmic, low, a pulsing hum, like an engine buried under miles of snow. Ryan noticed it too. He looked at me and said, "Do you feel that?" My teeth were chattering, but not from the cold. The air around us wasn't just cold, it was heavy, like the pressure dropped all at once. And then a flash, like a camera going off behind our eyes. We blinked, stumbled, and it was suddenly light out. Daytime, just like that. The fire was out. Our drinks were frozen solid. My phone, which had been at 78%, was dead. Ryan's was too. We checked the cabin clock. It read 8:17 a.m. But that wasn't the strange part. Outside, the snow was smooth again, undisturbed. No footsteps, not even our own tracks from earlier. It was like we'd never been out there at all. Ryan looked at me, his voice a whisper. Did we fall asleep? But we both remembered the hum, the pressure, the flash, and more than anything, I remember what I saw right before the flash. Not clearly, but enough. There was a shape in the lights, a figure, tall, thin, watching. For the rest of the day, we didn't speak much. We couldn't. Our minds were both racing with half memories and questions we didn't know how to ask. Later that evening, the aurora returned, but it looked different now. It was dimmer, faster, like it was agitated. The colors bled into each other, and for a moment, it looked like something large was moving behind it. We didn't go outside. That night, Ryan had a dream. He told me in the morning, pale and shaken, that he was standing in the snow, under the aurora, staring into a doorway made of light. And behind that doorway, something was calling to him. Not in words, but in a feeling. A pull. He said it felt like falling into himself. But here's the thing, so did I. I had the same dream. Same doorway. Same silence. Same thing watching. And we weren't sleepwalking. I checked the lock on the door in the morning. Still bolted from the inside. But our boots? Covered in fresh snow. I don't know what that means. I really don't. On the third day, things got stranger. We turned on Ryan's GPS watch to track our hike, just to make sure we stayed close. We walked about a mile out, not too far, just enough to see the ridgeline. The whole time, the air felt off, warmer than it should be, but not comfortable. Heavy again. That hum, that low-frequency throb came back. Faint at first, then clearer. When we turned around to head back, the trail behind us was gone. Like it had never been there. We retraced our steps, or at least tried to. But nothing matched. The trees looked the same in every direction. Our footprints were gone in minutes. We ended up back at the cabin eventually, but from the opposite direction. And that should be impossible. Ryan checked his GPS logs. It said we never moved. I still have a picture of the GPS screen. A flat line. We went back in. Packed up early. No more exploring. No more aurora. But that night, it came again, brighter than ever. We try not to look, but there was something magnetic about it. Something patient. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up to static. Loud, inhuman static echoing from the forest outside. No rhythm, just a screeching whine that vibrated through the walls. Ryan screamed, grabbed his ears, and ran outside barefoot. I followed. He was standing in the snow, eyes wide, staring upward. The lights were swirling above, and there, right at the center, was that figure again. Still tall, still watching. It didn't move, just hovered above the treetops, surrounded by green and violet streaks. Then suddenly it split. The light shattered, breaking into thin, twitching lines, like nerves firing in slow motion. The hum rose into a high whine, and then silence. Blackness. I woke up inside the cabin. Alone. Ryan wasn't there. His coat was still hanging. His phone, his pack, his boots, all untouched. I searched for hours. I screamed into the woods. No tracks. No sound. The only thing I found, carved into the ice on the window, in a language I didn't know, was a symbol. It looked like an eye, with too many lashes, too many pupils. When I finally made it back to Anchorage, no one believed me. Ryan's disappearance was written off as getting lost in the snow. I stopped trying to explain, but I kept researching. And here's where it gets worse. Across Inuit folklore, there are stories, old ones, of spirits that live inside the lights. Not gods, not demons, something else. They lure wanderers, disorient them, show them beautiful things, doorways made of light. They don't always take you. Sometimes they give you back, but you're not quite the same. I looked into missing persons cases in Alaska. Thousands. Many go missing near strong aurora regions. Disappearances that don't make sense. Tracks that vanish. Equipment that fails. No signs of struggle. Just gone. The locals were right. Don't stray past Teller Highway after dark. Don't look too long at the lights. Because if you do, you might not come back. Or worse, you might. Did you know there's a frequency that no official radio tower in Alaska claims to own, but people still hear it? A frequency that doesn't appear on any map, has no call sign, and only plays when you're far enough from civilization. Some say it only comes through when you're completely alone. Others say it knows when you're listening. In the fall of 2013, a 34-year-old geologist named Evan Marsh was working near the outskirts of the Brooks Range, scouting mineral deposits on behalf of a private energy firm. Evan wasn't new to isolation. He had camped solo in the Sierra Nevadas, spent weeks alone in the Mojave, and even wintered over in Barrow once during his grad work. But the North Slope? It was different. Colder, quieter, emptier. He had set up camp about 30 miles from the nearest village, far enough that even satellite signals got patchy. For company, he brought a wind-up radio. Not a modern one, either. An old Soviet-era shortwave he'd picked up years ago in Prague, mostly out of curiosity. The kind of radio that lets you pick up weird, foreign signals late at night. Encrypted codes, weather beacons, maritime alerts. Evan liked the unpredictability of it, the chaos. On the third night of his trip, Evan was huddled in his tent, waiting out a snow squall. The winds had picked up, and visibility had dropped to near zero. With nothing else to do, he cranked up his radio and started flipping through static. The usual sounds, clicks, buzzes, garbled voices in Russian, came and went. Then something different. A clear, warm female voice, speaking English, but not like a news anchor or a DJ. Her tone was casual, as if she was reading directly to him. And the snow falls just like it did on this night, 12 years ago. Funny how the wind always sounds like it's whispering your name. Evan froze. He turned the dial back and forth, trying to recapture the signal. It was there, weak but stable. The woman continued. Some of you out there think you're alone. You pitch your tents, light your fires, make your tea. You think the world has forgotten you. But you're wrong. We see you. And tonight's broadcast is just for you. A soft piano tune followed. Not a melody he recognized, but haunting in a way that felt familiar. Like something he'd heard in a dream once. Or maybe a lullaby from childhood that he couldn't quite place. Then the voice returned, slower now. Evan, you never told her the truth, did you? The air in the tent went completely still. He turned the radio off. For hours, Evan sat in silence, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. No one knew he was here. The company had his GPS coordinates, but even they wouldn't contact him unless something went wrong. And yet, his name. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was a pre-recorded station. Maybe she said Kevin or Devin. Maybe his brain just filled in the rest. He was tired, hungry, probably just auditory pareidolia. But the next night, he turned the radio back on. And again, the voice returned. No static, no identifies, no station ID. Just her. Welcome back, traveler. We knew you'd tune in again. Tonight's forecast calls for heavy winds and unburied memories. The woman began to describe a story. Not a news report, not fiction. A detailed account of a man named Evan, who lied to his sister before she disappeared in Glacier Bay 15 years earlier. Evan hadn't spoken of that event to anyone since her memorial, not even to his therapist. He dropped the radio and stumbled outside into the cold, gasping. The snow had stopped, but something else had started. A low hum, subaudible like an engine deep underground, and above it voices. Not from the radio, from the trees. Whispers that mirrored what the broadcast had said, but reversed, as if reality was starting to echo the signal. The following day, Evan hiked 5 miles back toward his truck. He didn't stop to rest, didn't eat, just walked shaken. As he reached a small ridge near the edge of his plotted sector, his GPS failed. The screen just blinked and reset repeatedly. That's when he saw the antenna. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet tall, wedged between a pair of frost-bitten spruce. It was clearly old, made from scrap and rusted parts, radio tubes, tin cans, copper wires. A crude transmitter, but somehow active. A thin red light blinked from the base. He approached it cautiously. There were no tracks, no signs of human maintenance. But beneath the transmitter was a box, an old cassette recorder. He pressed play. Her voice. You didn't come alone, Evan. You brought your regret. Your guilt. That's all we need to find you. Click. There are a few theories that try to explain what Evan encountered. The first is psychological projection. That in the isolation of the Alaskan wilderness, the human brain creates patterns to combat sensory deprivation. Evan's guilt over his sister manifested as an auditory hallucination, processed through the radio's white noise. The second is number stations, shortwave broadcasts used during the Cold War to transmit encrypted messages. Some believe remnants of these stations still exist in rogue form, manned by unknown entities or automated systems corrupted by time. This one somehow evolved into something sentient. And the third, that wasn't a station at all. That it was a place, a broadcasting point in space, not tied to any frequency or hardware, but to emotion, guilt, regret, secrets too long buried, that once you cross into certain coordinates, certain forgotten spaces in the Arctic wilderness, you tune into something that's already been listening. Evan made it back to Anchorage. He turned in his samples, resigned from the project, and moved to Arizona. But the radio came with him. He didn't want it. He couldn't leave it, because it wouldn't let him. He says the station still speaks to him. Not every night, only when he's alone and the desert gets quiet. He's recorded dozens of tapes, but when he plays them for others, they only hear static. Only he hears her voice. Only he hears what he still refuses to say out loud. And somewhere in Alaska, that rusted antenna still stands, waiting, broadcasting, listening. It wasn't his face I remembered. It was the exact way he said it. You'll die cold and alone, and it won't be your fault. At the time, I laughed it off. I had just landed in Anchorage after a red-eye, buzzed from bad airport coffee, and exhausted from a breakup I didn't want to think about. I thought he was a drifter. I thought he was crazy. But he knew my name before I told it to him, and he vanished before I could ask how. This happened last December. I had accepted a winter caretaker position at a remote Alaskan research outpost. 2 buildings, solar power, stocked rations, satellite phone. 3 months alone. I needed the money, and more than that, I needed distance from my old life. Silence, snow, and signal loss sounded like healing. That stranger's warning? I buried it under logic. Maybe I dropped my ID and he saw it. Maybe he was just guessing, messing with me. But his words returned, quietly at first, like whispers through frostbitten windows. The outpost was nestled against the base of a low ridge, deep in the interior. Getting there meant a 6-hour ride in a snowcat with a grizzled driver named Clay, who spoke in half sentences and chewed tobacco the entire way. When I asked if the place was haunted, he didn't laugh. He just said, "You'll hear things. Don't follow them." That night, I watched the sun set in slow motion. Winter daylight lasted maybe 4 hours. The rest was varying shades of blue and black. Silence, there isn't true silence. It's the hum of solar batteries, the pop of ice shifting under the floorboards, the occasional thump of wind like something knocking to be let in. 2 weeks in, the dream started. I'd wake up freezing, even though the heater was running full blast. In the dream, I was outside, barefoot, standing in the snow, not walking, just waiting, and something was watching me from the tree line, not moving, just watching. In the 3rd week, I found boot prints in the snow behind the storage shed. One set, deep, human-shaped. They weren't mine. I told myself it was probably Clay, or someone from the supply base doing a flyover drop-off I hadn't heard. But the tracks led in a straight line from the woods to the back of the shed and stopped. No return prints. No disturbance in the powder. Just a clean exit from nothing. I tried calling the base. The satellite phone wouldn't connect. No static. No ring. Just dead air, like it hadn't ever worked in the first place. I remember holding in my hand, pressing the buttons over and over like repetition would force reality back into place. I started talking to myself, out loud, just so the silence wouldn't feel so thick. That's when I saw him again, outside the kitchen window, around 3:30 a.m. The same man from the airport. Only this time, he was wearing a thick parka, face obscured under a heavy hood. He didn't knock. He just stood in the dark, waiting. When I opened the door, he was gone. No footprints, no wind, Nothing but the faintest outline in the snow, like someone had almost been there, but not quite. The next day, every clock in the outpost had stopped at 2:17 a.m. I hadn't noticed it right away, but when I went to check the weather console, I saw the digital freeze. Not just the kitchen clock. Every device. I checked the logs. Power had surged at 2:17, and in the 20 minutes that followed, the cameras blacked out. All except one. Camera 4 faced the rear corridor, the hall I never used. It led to a locked supply closet. The footage showed a flicker, then a man walking slowly down the corridor. Same parka, same height, and this time, he turned to look directly into the lens. His face wasn't obscured. It was mine. I watched the clip 7 times. Zoom slowed, paused, but it didn't change. It wasn't some mask or digital glitch. It was like someone had printed my face perfectly and wore it like skin. Eyes dead, expression blank. Not mimicking me, just wearing me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the generator room, surrounded by mechanical hum, armed with a flare gun and the irrational belief that light equals safety. At 3:13 a.m., the emergency siren went off. No cause, no motion detection, no breach, just the screech of alarms in the dark, triggered by nothing I could see. But I felt it, that something had entered, not from the outside, but from somewhere already inside the outpost. I checked every door, every panel, every crawl space, and when I got to the back corridor, the locked closet door was wide open. Inside, it was just a room. Shelves, dust, old tools, and a mirror. But the mirror wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. And when I looked into it, I saw myself. But not now. I was older, paler, eyes bloodshot and sunken, frostbite around my lips. Behind me, in the reflection, was the man in the parka. He raised his hand, not waving, pointing, not at me, but at something behind me. I turned, nothing. I looked back at the mirror. Now the reflection was gone. I sealed that door with planks from the storage room and didn't go back. Days blurred after that. Every sound felt meaningful. Every silence felt too silent. I began finding scraps of paper, slips in drawers, tucked under plates, hidden in books. All in my handwriting, but I hadn't written them. They weren't diary entries. They were warnings. Don't trust the radio. It lives between seconds. It's not a person, it's a time. I finally broke down and packed. I planned to hike to the nearest base camp, 14 miles west. Dangerous in the cold, but I couldn't take the outpost any longer. I turned off the solar grid, locked every door behind me, and left at dawn. 10 minutes into the hike, my GPS failed. It reset itself. Screen blinked, and the coordinates it displayed weren't moving. Like I hadn't left. Like I was walking in place. I looked up and saw smoke. Black smoke rising from the outpost chimney. The one I had just shut off. I ran back. I don't know why. Maybe to prove it wasn't real. Maybe because something deep in me knew I had to. When I got to the ridge, the outpost was gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Just gone. Like it had never been there. In its place was a flat sheet of snow. No buildings. No solar panels. No footprints. Just untouched white. And standing in the center was the man. Same parka. Same hood. And when he looked up, I saw his face. It was me. Again. Only this time, he was smiling. And then he spoke. Not aloud, but inside my skull. Like memory. Like echo. You died cold. And alone. And it wasn't your fault. And just like that, I was back in the outpost. Lights on. Systems running. Like I'd never left. But now the mirror is in my room. The clocks still stop at 2:17. The footage still shows me walking in places I haven't gone. And every night, the man returns. Not knocking, just watching. And each time, he looks a little more like me. And I feel a little less like myself. Some parts of Alaska, the trees don't move with the wind. They move with something else. Something that screams without a mouth and glows without light. It started with a dare. Not the childish kind that ends in laughter or scraped knees, but the kind you regret before it even begins. Drew, Ellis, and I were on a week-long backpacking trip through the Talkeetna backcountry. No service, no signals, just snow-crusted boots, endless pine, and the growing tension that something wasn't right. It was Ellis who first noticed it. "The trees, they're too quiet," he said on the second night. And he was right. Even in the dead of winter, you expect to hear the soft creak of trunks swaying or maybe the distant hoot of an owl. But there was nothing, not even wind, just stillness. The kind of stillness that presses into your ears until your own heartbeat feels too loud. That night, the light came. At first, it looked like a flicker, a pulse, about 50 feet into the tree line. It wasn't fire, and it wasn't a flashlight. It glowed white-blue, not warm like a flame, and it didn't cast shadows. It hovered for a second, then it twitched. That's the only word I have for it. Like it was adjusting itself. Not like a lamp, but like something alive testing its shape. Ellis whispered, "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first, it was just the wind picking up again, except it wasn't wind. It was screaming, but not from a throat. It was higher pitched, mechanical, almost like metal being scraped in reverse. The light flickered in time with the sound, stuttering and surging like it was communicating. We should have run, but we didn't. We stood there, breath held, rooted like the trees. Drew muttered, "It's not looking at us," which made no sense. The light didn't have eyes, but that's the thing, we knew it could see us. Somehow, Ellis threw a rock at it. A stupid, impulsive move. The second the rock entered the tree line, the light vanished. Just blinked out, and the screaming stopped. We laughed it off the next morning. Sort of. Said it had to be swamp gas. Aurora borealis. Some strange reflection off the snow. Alaska has its share of weird. But I noticed we all kept glancing at the same patch of trees. Like we expected something to blink back. It returned the next night. Same time. Around 3:17 a.m. This time, it didn't just hover. It moved. It floated in a zigzag motion between the trunks, as if trying to confuse our sense of depth. And when it passed behind a tree, the tree would bend slightly away from it. Like even the woods didn't want to be touched. Then the screaming started again. Only this time, it sounded more human. It had a shape now, barely visible around the glow. Tall, thin, unnaturally narrow, like it had been stretched. Limbs too long. And when it paused, the light pulsed in its chest. That's when Ellis said it out loud. I think it's learning. Those words still echo in my head. We tried to leave at sunrise, but our compass wouldn't settle. Every direction spun. The sun rose, but it stayed low, never climbing above the trees. Like it wasn't trying. Drew was the first to break. He packed his bag in silence, said nothing, and just walked into the forest. Not the trail, not the direction we came from, just straight toward where the light had been. Ellis and I shouted after him, but it was like the trees swallowed sound. We chased him for what felt like hours, until he found his bag. Not torn, not dropped, just placed, carefully. And beside it, in the snow, a perfect circle of melted ground, about 5 feet across. No footprints leading in or out, just that impossibly clean circle, still warm to the touch. That night, the light didn't appear, but we heard something worse. A voice, Drew's voice, calling to us from outside the tent. At first it sounded normal, panicked like he was lost. But as the minutes passed, it grew more scripted, repeating the same phrases, same tone, over and over. "Guys, I'm cold. I think I'm lost. Can you hear me?" Then silence. Then, "Guys, I'm cold. I think I'm lost. Can you hear me?" We didn't answer. We just cried. In the morning, we followed his voice. But it didn't lead us to Drew. It led us to the tree line again. And there, etched into the bark of a pine, was a burn mark in the shape of a spiral. Clean, precise, still smoldering. We left everything behind. No gear, no food, just bolted until the forest changed. Until we heard birds again. Until the trees moved with the wind like they should. We reported it, of course. The park rangers listened, nodded, and scribbled notes they didn't believe. One of them pulled us aside and said, "Sometimes up here, the woods echo things that aren't from this world. Best not to answer back." Weeks later, I received a voicemail. No number, just static at first, then Drew's voice. Not crying, not scared, just repeating, "I'm cold. I think I'm lost. Can you hear me?" Over and over. And behind his voice, Underneath it was the faint screech of that light, like it was still learning, still practicing, still waiting. And I realized something. That light never left the tree line. It followed us back. They say that in Alaska, if something disappears, it might not want to be found. But sometimes it comes back anyway. My brother was missing in the Alaskan wild for 3 days. Search and rescue told us the cold probably got him. But then he walked back into camp, smiling like he'd never left. Only, that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that he didn't remember the cold at all. We were deep in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, 4 of us, me, my brother Kyle, and 2 friends, Adam and Jen. The plan was to hike to an old mining site Kyle found in a Reddit thread. Supposedly, it had been abandoned for decades. Nothing but rusted structures and collapsed shafts just off the main trail. The first day was uneventful, long, cold, and quiet. The snow had that muffled quality that made you feel like you were walking inside a dream. Nothing moved, not even birds. At night, the wind didn't howl. It whispered. By the second day, we found the site. It was exactly where the post said it'd be. An old chain-link fence, mostly flattened by time, surrounded a collapsed wooden building. There were rusted beams jutting out of the snow like broken bones. A faded sign said, "No entry, private property," half buried beneath a sheet of ice. But Kyle was obsessed. He swore there were tunnels underneath, maybe even equipment left behind. That's when things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. My watch stopped working. Adam's compass kept spinning. Jen said her GPS app kept rerouting her back to the same clearing over and over again, even though we hadn't moved. We camped near the site just for the night. And that night, Kyle disappeared. He said he wanted to take one last look around before bed. He had his headlamp and promised not to go far. But hours passed. He didn't come back. We searched. We yelled. We hiked in circles, retracing every step. No kaid. No tracks, either. The snow was untouched, like it had swallowed him whole. It was as if he'd simply walked out of existence. The nearest ranger station was miles away. We sent Adam back for help. Jen and I stayed behind in case Kyle came back. We didn't sleep. But then, 3 days later, he did. It was just after sunrise. I was boiling snow for water when I heard something crunch behind me. I turned, and there he was. Kyle, standing at the edge of the clearing. Not shivering, not pale, just smiling. His clothes were clean. No frostbite, no signs of exposure. He didn't even look tired. And when I asked him where he'd been, he frowned. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. I never left. We thought maybe it was shock. Hypothermia-induced confusion, maybe. But the more he talked, the more it felt wrong. He remembered the hike, the mine, us setting up camp. But after that, it was fuzzy. No memory of getting lost. No fear. No hunger. No cold. He said he just woke up in the trees and walked back. But here's the thing. He was different. His laugh was too slow. His blink rate was off. He'd stare just a second too long before responding. And his voice had this subtle, almost metallic echo, like it was bouncing off something just behind his throat. And then there was the shadow. The second night after he returned, we were by the fire. Jen was asleep. Adam hadn't come back yet. I noticed Kyle staring into the woods. Just still, unmoving. "Do you see that?" he asked. I followed his gaze. "Nothing." "What do you see?" He didn't answer, just stood up and began mimicking animal sounds. A low, wet growl, a shrill screech, then a perfect imitation of my voice, saying his name. Kyle. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but when I woke up, Kyle was gone again. And Jen, who had heard it too, was packed and ready to hike out. She wouldn't speak. Her hands were shaking. She just whispered, "That's not your brother," and left. When Adam came back with the Rangers, we told them everything. They found Kyle again, just outside camp, humming to himself beside the collapsed shaft. They took him in for observation. His vitals were normal. Brain scans, blood work, normal. But here's where things spiral. A week later, I got a call from the hospital. Kyle had walked out. No shoes, no ID. They said he left behind a note. But it wasn't a note. It was a drawing. An exact top-down map of the mine with a tunnel that wasn't listed in any registry. A tunnel that went straight down. I tried to follow it. I went back to the site with a local guide. The snow was heavier than before. The entrance Kyle had drawn had collapsed years ago, maybe longer. But I swear, standing there, I could hear something beneath the ice. A distant, rhythmic hum, like a heartbeat pulsing from underground. And then my phone vibrated. One new message. No number. Just the word. Awake. I don't know what happened to my brother in those 3 days. I don't know what came back. But I do know this. There are places in Alaska that don't belong on any map. And if something calls to you from the trees, don't follow. Because not everything that comes out of the wild should have made it back. Pilots flying over the Yukon sometimes see lights, ones that don't blink, don't follow air traffic paths, and don't show up on radar. But what's stranger than the lights is what happens after you see them. And some pilots never get the chance to explain. Flight 292 was a routine mail run. A small twin-prop Cessna flying north out of Whitehorse toward a remote community near Old Crow. It was winter, naturally, and the sun had dipped below the mountains hours ago, leaving behind a sky like ink soaked in starlight. The pilot, Evan Markey, had logged nearly 2,000 hours flying in subarctic conditions. Ice, turbulence, mechanical failures. None of it rattled him anymore. He flew these frozen corridors like veins in his own body. But on January 4th, 2019, he radioed in something he'd never reported before. At 8:42 p.m., just north of the Ogilvy Mountains, he made a calm but strange call to the tower. I have a visual on something. No transponder. No flight path. It's keeping pace with me, off the right wing. The controller responded, checking instruments. No traffic. Nothing on radar. Standard stuff. Pilots sometimes catch sight of other aircraft far off, or stars that shimmer unusually. But Evan added something else. It's closer now. Too close. And it's changing shape. Then silence. The next 5 minutes are a blank. He missed his next scheduled call. But at 8:49, he came back, breathing heavily, voice flat. Never mind. It's gone. Just turbulence. That was the last anyone heard from him. The plane did make it to its destination. Landed fine. But Evan never filed the landing report. He never exited the cockpit. When a crew member opened the door, they found him sitting perfectly still, hands on the yoke, staring straight ahead. Alive, but unresponsive, like a living statue, heart still beating. Doctors later diagnosed him with a form of catatonic stupor, but no one could figure out what caused it. No physical trauma, no stroke, and no history of mental illness. But what's truly chilling is what he scratched into the metal under the yoke with his keys. It knew my name. At first, stories like these seem like isolated incidents. Pilot stress, high-altitude hallucinations, even sleep deprivation. But what makes this story hard to ignore is how many times similar descriptions show up in flight logs, often in the dead of winter, in roughly the same patch of Yukon airspace. Pilots describe objects pacing them at impossible speeds, lights that hover, then vanish. Some even say they see dark shapes against the stars, silhouettes of things that block the sky itself. One former Bush pilot, who flew in the 80s, claimed he once lost 18 minutes after spotting a shimmering white object outside his window. The onboard clock showed the time had passed, but neither he nor his instruments could account for it. He wrote in his journal, "There was a pressure, not like gravity but thought, like something was trying to crawl inside my mind and make me forget my own memories." But the most unnerving account came from a 2021 medevac flight. 2 paramedics on board swore the same thing. A long, eel-like shadow gliding just under the clouds, following their plane for nearly 40 miles. No lights, no sound, just a presence. When they landed, the patient, who was unconscious the whole flight, woke up in a cold sweat and whispered. It didn't get in this time. This has led to theories far beyond the normal UFO folklore. Some researchers believe these encounters aren't about aliens or crafts at all, but something older, something atmospheric, parasitic. They think there's a region of sky over the Yukon where reality gets thin, where something waits between layers of perception. An ancient Inuit legend speaks of Savulak, the first one, a sky being that could mimic light, stretch like a snake, and whisper names to those who traveled too high or too far. It was said to eat memory, not flesh. Those it touched returned as hollow versions of themselves, or not at all. Skeptical? Sure. But these stories follow a consistent emotional pattern. After encountering the phenomenon, people either go silent, become obsessed with the sky, or begin forgetting parts of themselves. One man from Dawson City, a mechanic, witnessed one of these so-called sky snakes while hunting with his son in 2015. It wasn't a plane. It didn't make noise. It shimmered like heat above snow, but in a straight line. He described it as a ripple of wrongness. A week later, he got lost driving home from work. Then he forgot his daughter's name. 6 months later, he was committed. He couldn't recognize his own face in the mirror. But even from the psychiatric ward, he kept drawing the same thing on the wall. A plane. And above it, teeth made of stars. The strangest detail? Black box recordings from some of these encounters show static interference, often right before the sighting begins. But engineers can't explain why the interference seems to take the shape of a voice, buried in the waveform, saying things that haven't yet been decoded. One independent researcher tried running the audio through a spectrogram. What he found wasn't a voice exactly. It was coordinates, a fixed point, repeated in different cases. Latitude 67,78 symbol stopnia, in longitude 138,2894 symbol stopnia w. That's over an uninhabited stretch of tundra near the Blackstone uplands. No structures, no towers, just sky, wind, and snow. And every year, around the winter solstice, pilots report more sightings in that area than anywhere else in the Yukon. So what is it? A natural phenomenon? A mass psychological event? Or something far stranger? Here's a theory some have quietly proposed. What if there's something sentient in the upper atmosphere? Not a creature made of flesh or blood, but of data, memory, frequency. Something that evolved not on another planet, but here, above us, feeding on thoughts the way whales filter plankton. It only brushes close when a plane breaks through a certain veil of silence, at the right altitude, time, and state of mind. It doesn't need to touch the body, only the awareness, the soul, if you believe in such things. And if that's true, if something ancient and invisible is waiting